They dragged her into the village square before the sun had fully set. Dust clung to her feet. Shame burned her throat. And then her own father raised his voice and said the words that broke her forever. "She is no daughter of mine." The crowd did not ask for proof. They never do. They only needed a name, a rumor, a girl who was poor and easy to crush. They called her a thief. They laughed. They watched her walk away with nothing but tears and silence. What they didn't know was this. That same night, a quiet palm wine seller was watching, and the lie they celebrated was already digging its own grave. Before the truth returns to claim its price, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your country. And if you believe stories of justice, kindness, and hidden destinies matter, don't forget to subscribe. The village of Aquanza sat between a tired road and a restless market, the kind of place where everyone knew your name, your parents, and the mistakes you made before you were old enough to understand them. By day, the air smelled of roasted maize palm oil and dust warmed by the sun. By night, it carried whispers, old grudges, half-truths, and the kind of gossip that traveled faster than truth ever could. In a narrow compound near the edge of the market lived Sadia and her family. The house was small, but orderly, swept every morning, its walls patched with care. Sadia had learned early that poverty did not excuse neglect. Her late mother had taught her that much before illness carried her away, leaving Sadia still young but already holding the weight of responsibility. Her father, Baba Musa, was a man shaped by tradition and pride. He spoke little, listened even less, and believed deeply in legacy. What his own father had passed down to him he guarded with near reverence. Among all his possessions, one stood above the rest, a heavy gold pendant shaped like a kola nut strung on worn leather. It had belonged to his father and to his father before him. To Baba Musa, it was not just gold, it was memory, identity, proof that his bloodline mattered. He kept it wrapped in cloth hidden inside a carved wooden box at the back of his room. Sometimes on quiet evenings he would take it out just to look at it, as if checking that the past was still breathing. And whenever his son asked about it, Baba Musa's voice would harden. "This is not for children," he would say. "One day when you stand firm like a tree it will be yours." That son was Kofi, restless, sharp-eyed, and always hungry for more than the village could offer. Kofi was Sadia's younger brother, her twin by birth, but her opposite in spirit. Where Sadia moved with patience, Kofi burned with impatience. Where she worked for every coin, he dreamed of shortcuts. From an early age, the village had made it clear that boys like Kofi were allowed to stumble, to fail, even to sin a little, as long as they eventually became men. Girls, like Sadia, were given no such grace. A mistake from her would not be called a mistake at all. It would be called her nature. So Sadia learned to be careful. Each morning, before the sun climbed too high, she walked to the market with a woven basket balanced on her head. She sold beans, okra, sometimes ground nuts, whatever she could afford that week. She greeted customers by name, smiled even when they haggled too hard, and returned home with just enough to cook supper and set aside a few coins for soap or kerosene. At home, she swept, she cooked, she fetched water, and when Baba Musa spoke, she listened. Respect, her mother had said, was a shield. Even when it did not protect you, it kept your spine straight. Kofi watched all of this with thinly veiled contempt. "You work like an old woman," he once muttered as she counted coins by lantern light. "And you dream like a child," she replied gently, not looking up. Kofi laughed, but the words lodged somewhere deep. Behind the old cinema, on the western edge of Aquanza, there was a place the elders pretended not to see. A patch of bare earth surrounded by broken bricks and torn posters where boys gathered after school hours, or instead of them. They called it a game, a harmless way to test luck. Dice carved from bone, cards with corners soft from too many hands. And always someone swore that a rich man's son had once walked away with more money than he could carry. Those stories set Kofi's blood on fire. Why should wealth belong only to those born into it? Why should waiting be a virtue? Each time his friend spoke of winning big, his chest tightened with longing. He wanted to prove something to the village, to his father, to himself. On the afternoon, everything began to unravel, the heat pressed down heavy and unforgiving. Baba Musa had returned from the river earlier than usual, his breath thick with palm wine, his body surrendering quickly to sleep. Sadia was still at the market bargaining hard for a small sack of beans. Kofi stood alone in the compound listening to the familiar sounds of the village, the call of hawkers, the distant laughter of children, the lazy hum of insects. His eyes drifted toward his father's room. He knew which floorboard creaked. He knew where the box was kept. His heart raced not with fear but with excitement. Just this once, he told himself. Just enough to win. Enough to return it before anyone noticed. Enough to show the world that he too could stand tall. He slipped inside. The room smelled of old wood and cloth dried too many times in the sun. Kneeling, he reached behind the storage chest and pulled out the carved box. His hands trembled as he unwrapped the cloth. When he opened the lid, the gold pendant caught a blade of sunlight and glowed as if alive. For a moment, doubt flickered. Then the voices of his friends drowned it out. By the time Sadia returned home later that evening, tired but satisfied with her day's work, the wind had begun to shift. She didn't notice it at first. She was too busy setting her basket down, too busy thinking about supper. She had no idea that somewhere behind the old cinema, fate was already spinning its trap. And Kofi, clutching his father's past in his shaking hands, was walking straight into it. The betting pit behind the old cinema came alive in the late afternoon, when the sun dipped low enough to cast long shadows that hid intentions as easily as faces. The place smelled of dust, sweat, and reckless hope. Torn posters flapped against cracked walls, whispering promises of heroes long forgotten. Boys, who should have been in classrooms, gathered in a loose circle, their laughter sharp and nervous, like knives tapped together for courage. Kofi arrived with the weight of the pendant pressing against his chest, hidden beneath his shirt. Each step felt louder than the last. His heart beat so hard he was sure someone could hear it. Yet beneath the fear was something sweeter anticipation. The thrill of standing on the edge of something dangerous and believing foolishly that danger would bow to him. "Today is your day," one of his friends said, clapping him on the back. "I can feel it." Kofi smiled, forcing confidence into his face. He had practiced this look. He had watched older boys wear it when they lied to themselves. At the center of the circle sat the fast-hand man. Everyone knew him by reputation, though few knew his real name. His fingers moved with a lazy grace, never hurried, never still. He smiled often, but his eyes remained cold, calculating. He had the look of someone who fed on other people's certainty. "What's the stake?" the man asked, his voice smooth as oil. Kofi swallowed and pulled the pendant free. It glimmered dully in the fading light, heavy and unmistakably valuable. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Even the fast-hand man's smile tightened just slightly. "That's a serious thing," he said, lifting the pendant and weighing it in his palm. "You sure, boy?" "I'm sure," Kofi replied too quickly. "I'll win." The man wrapped the pendant in a rag and set it beside him. "First round," he said lightly, just to warm the ground. The dice rolled. Kofi lost. A few boys laughed gently at first. The fast-hand man shrugged. "Beginnings are stubborn," he said. "Try again." The second round went no better. Kofi's confidence cracked, but he plastered it back together with bravado. His mind raced, calculating how close he was to disaster, while pretending he wasn't thinking about it at all. "One more," he said, his voice thin. "Luck is coming." The third roll felt slow, as if time itself had decided to watch. When the dice settled, the pit fell quiet. Kofi stared at the result, his breath catching painfully in his chest. He had lost everything. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then the fast-hand man smiled wide, bright, and empty. "Game's end," he said, sliding the wrapped pendant out of sight. "Come back when your luck remembers you." Kofi lunged forward, panic tearing through him. "Wait, that's my—" The man's smile vanished. "Careful," he warned softly. "You lost fair." The crowd began to disperse suddenly, uninterested, now that the spectacle had soured. Kofi stood frozen, the noise of the village rushing back into his ears like a flood. His legs trembled. His mouth tasted of ash. He ran. He ran all the way home, his chest burning, his thoughts splintering with every step. The compound gate creaked as he burst through it. He paced the yard like a trapped animal, pulling at his hair, breathing in short, desperate bursts. "Confess," a small voice whispered. He pictured Baba Musa's face, hard, unforgiving. He imagined the shame, the anger, the punishment that would follow. The thought crushed him. Then another image surfaced. Sadia, her quiet diligence, her careful savings, her endless patience. And most importantly, the way the village already watched her with suspicion, sharpened by envy. The idea slid into place like a blade finding its sheath. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, Kofi had made his choice. Sadia returned with her basket of beans, just as the evening settled into its familiar rhythm. She hummed softly as she entered the compound, pleased with how well she had bargained. She placed the basket on the shelf and reached for the lantern, unaware that the air itself had changed. Baba Musa stirred from his sleep, yawning deeply. As he always did, he rose and went straight to his room. Sadia barely noticed. She was too busy sorting the beans, thinking about supper. Then the shout came. It tore through the compound like thunder. "My father's jewel." Sadia froze. The lantern slipped from her fingers and clanged against the floor. Baba Musa stumbled out of his room, the carved box clutched in his hand, his eyes wild with disbelief and rage. "Thieves," he roared. "Thieves in my house." Kofi stood perfectly still, his heart hammering so loudly he thought it might betray him. For a split second, guilt flared so sharply it nearly made him speak. But fear smothered it just as quickly. I saw Sadia near your room today," he whispered, his voice shaking just enough to sound convincing. Sadia turned slowly, her mind struggling to catch up with his words. What she asked. "What did you say?" Baba Musa's head snapped toward her. "Were you in my room?" The question hit her like a slap. "No, Baba," she said, her voice steady, despite the sudden terror tightening her chest. "I was at the market. All day." Kofi took a step forward, wrapping himself in practiced panic. "She passes your door often," he said quickly, "and she always needs money. Maybe she wanted to sell it." "I don't know." He let the sentence hang unfinished, dangerous. Sadia's mouth opened, then closed. "Baba, I would never." "Enough," Baba Musa bellowed. His chest heaved as years of pride and anger spilled over. "Call the elders, call the neighbors, let the square judge." The words fell like stones. Before Sadia could react, her father seized her arm and dragged her toward the gate. The basket of beans tipped and spilled across the floor, scattering like small pale moons. No one stopped to pick them up. Outside, the drum sounded a sharp, urgent rhythm. Doors opened. Faces appeared. Curiosity bloomed like wildfire. "What has she done now?" someone whispered. "It's the motherless girl," another murmured. Sadia found herself standing in the center of the square, dust curling around her ankles, the crowd forming a tight, hungry circle. She searched for familiar faces, customers she had served, neighbors she had greeted, but many looked away. Others stared openly, eager for scandal. Baba Musa held up the empty box. "My father's pendant is gone," he declared. "This girl stole it." The words slammed into Sadia's chest. "I did not," she said, her voice trembling despite her effort. "I swear I did not." Then who did her father demanded? The crowd shifted. Someone mentioned Kofi's absence earlier in the day. Another voice rose to confirm Sadia's presence at the market. Hope flickered briefly. Then Mr. Bellows stepped forward, his smile slick and assured. "Quiet girls have quick hands," he said lightly. "We all know that." Laughter rippled cruel and sharp. An elder turned to Kofi. "Boy," he said, "did you see her take it?" Kofi felt his throat close. For a heartbeat, the truth hovered on his tongue, then he swallowed it. "I saw her near the door," he said. Silence fell thick and final. The elder sighed. "There is doubt," he admitted. "But a father's word is heavy, and the son's word adds weight." Baba Musa stepped forward, his face carved from fury. "She leaves tonight," he declared. "Forever. Let the ground keep my house clean." Sadia bowed to the elders because her mother had taught her respect even in pain. Then she turned and walked away, carrying nothing but the echo of her brother's lie and the sound of the crowd exhaling in satisfaction. At the edge of the square, beneath the watching palms, a man with calm eyes and tapper's hands watched her go. And fate, unseen but attentive, shifted once more. Night came quickly after Sadia was cast out, as if the village itself wanted to hide what it had done. The moon hung thin and sharp above Akwansa, a pale witness that offered no warmth. Sadia walked without direction at first, her feet carrying her beyond the square, beyond the familiar paths she had traced since childhood. Each step felt unreal, like she was moving through someone else's life. Behind her, the village returned to its routines. Doors closed. Fires were lit. Laughter rose and fell. The story had already begun to change shape, growing teeth as it traveled. By morning, it would no longer matter what Sadia said or where she had been. The lie had found a home. She reached the edge of the palm groves just as her strength began to fail. Her legs shook not from the walk, but from the weight of what had been taken from her so suddenly, her name, her place, her father's protection. She stopped, pressed her hands to her face, and finally allowed the tears to fall. They were slow, tears, heavy ones, as if they had been waiting for years. "Child," the voice came softly from behind her. Sadia turned, startled, her body tensing with instinctive fear. A man stood a few steps away, holding a gourd tied with rope. He wore a faded shirt, his feet bare, his posture relaxed but respectful. His hands were thick with calluses, the hands of someone who climbed trees for a living. She recognized him at once, the palm wine seller who had stood at the edge of the square watching when everyone else had judged. "My name is Amani," he said gently. "I saw what happened." Sadia straightened, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. "I did nothing," she said quickly, as if the night itself needed convincing. "I know," Amani replied without hesitation. The certainty in his voice startled her more than the accusation had. Most people spoke doubt first and belief later, if at all. He spoke belief as if it were obvious. "The night is not safe for a girl alone," he continued. "Come, for tonight take shelter at my tapper's hut." Suspicion flared immediately. Life had taught Sadia that help often arrived with a hidden cost. She studied his face carefully, searching for hunger of the wrong kind. She found only fatigue and something steadier beneath it. "You can lock the inner room from inside," Amani added, reading her fear. "I have 2 mats. We won't share a wall." Silence stretched between them. The wind moved through the palms, whispering like an elder clearing his throat. Sadia nodded. They walked together along a narrow path that dipped toward the river. The hut sat between 3 old palm trees, its walls made of clay and woven fronds, its roof low and sturdy. Smoke curled faintly from a small opening carrying the smell of wood and sap. Inside, Amani lit a lamp and set down his gourd. "Drink," he said, handing her a cup of cool water before offering anything else. "Food is simple here." He placed roasted plantain on a leaf and pushed it toward her. Sadia hesitated, then ate carefully, as if the food might disappear if she moved too quickly. Outside, crickets stitched the darkness together with their song. Amani worked quietly, checking his ropes, scraping resin from a calabash, counting gourds marked with chalk lines. There was a rhythm to his movements that calmed her, the quiet confidence of someone who trusted his hands and the work they knew how to do. In this village, he said at last, people like to watch. They don't like to look. There is a difference. Sadia glanced at him. Which one did you do today? I looked, he said simply, and I didn't like what I saw. He gestured toward a small inner room. It's yours. Lock it. Sleep. At dawn we begin again. Begin what she asked. Small things, he replied, sweeping, boiling water, taking stock. The world is heavy, but small things make a path through it. Inside the room, Sadia found a mat, a folded cloth, and a small wooden carving of a bird on the windowsill. She locked the door and leaned against it, her knees finally giving way. The tears came again, quieter, this time older. Before sleep claimed her, she heard Amani humming a tune with no words, steady as a heartbeat. At first light, he tapped gently on the door. Water is boiling, he called. Sadia washed her face and stepped out. For the first time since the square, she felt something loosen inside her chest. Not hope was too big a word, but calm. The beginning of it. They fell into a rhythm without speaking. Sadia swept the sandy floor, careful not to raise dust. She arranged clay cups on a low table. She counted gourds and copied Amani's chalk marks into a small slate, her handwriting neat and precise. He watched her work with quiet approval. Villagers arrived early, drawn by the promise of fresh morning pull. Some stared openly at Sadia and snickered. Look, one man whispered loudly, the jewel girl is serving wine. Sadia kept her face smooth. Amani poured with a measured hand, greeting each customer as if insults were flies not worth swatting. When a man reached out and tried to pinch Sadia's arm, Amani's voice sharpened. Respect my house, he said. Just once. The man withdrew, surprised. By midday, a small heap of coins lay beneath a flat shard of pottery. Amani slid some toward Sadia. For your work? Panic rose in her chest. I can't take it, she said. If my father hears, you have no father today, Amani said quietly. Take it, save it, you'll need soap. The coin felt heavy in her palm, heavy but clean. As they prepared to close for the afternoon, a shadow fell across the doorway. Mr. Bello stood there, flanked by two young men dressed too well for honest work. His smile was wide and oily, his eyes sharp. A cup, he said, already stepping inside. No 3 calabashes. The good ones. Amani poured without comment. Bello drank fast, sighed loudly, and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Sweet, he declared. Send the bill to the wind. You owe for 3, Amani replied evenly. Bello chuckled. You're lucky I honored your place today. Some of us drink only from clean hands. Kesha no, Sadia stood still, breath held. Pay, Amani said again, his voice firm. Bello leaned forward, his smile thinning. You're a tapper with sap under your nails, he sneered. You don't deserve my money. His eyes slid to Sadia. And you little thief don't deserve my time. The wind rose outside, rattling the fronds. Something unseen shifted its weight. Pay, Amani said once more. Bello laughed too loudly, as if to drown the tension, then swept out of the hut, knocking a clay cup from the table. It shattered on the floor, the sound sharp and final. Silence followed. Sadia bent to gather the pieces, her hands steady now. Amani knelt beside her. You did well, he said softly. You stood straight. I felt like a leaf in a storm, she admitted. Leaves survive storms, he replied. They bend. They hold on. That evening, as shadows deepened, voices passed the hut, shouting, free wine, thief's wine. Laughter followed, cruel and careless. Amani closed the door and latched it, his shoulders sagging for the first time. Sadia knelt before him. "Let me help," she said. "We can sweeten the bitter batch. Sell to the fishers at dawn, they pay." He looked up, surprise warming into something else. We, she repeated. They boiled syrup late into the night, the hut filling with the smell of smoke and hope. Outside, the palms whispered, and far away the village slept, unaware that the lie it had planted was already beginning to crack. Morning arrived wrapped in a pale mist that clung to the river and the palm trunks like a warning. Sadia woke before the sun, her body still sore from the day before, her mind restless with memories she could not quiet. For a moment she did not know where she was. Then the smell of smoke and sap returned her to the hut, to the thin mat beneath her, to the truth of her new life. She stepped outside quietly. Amani was already awake, tightening ropes and checking hooks with practiced ease. He greeted her with a nod as if they had always shared mornings like this. They worked without speaking at first. Sadia washed the cups in cool river water, scrubbing carefully as if cleanliness itself could defend her. Amani lifted the calabashes one by one, listening to the liquid inside, judging their readiness by sound alone. The rhythm steadied her breathing. By the time the first customers arrived, the sun had climbed high enough to burn away the mist. With it came eyes, curious, sharp, hungry. The news had spread overnight. Women paused on the path, whispering behind their hands. Men lingered longer than necessary, pretending to inspect the wine while inspecting Sadia instead. Children pointed openly. "That's her," someone murmured. The girl they chased away. Sadia felt each word like a pebble, thrown gently but often. She kept her gaze lowered, her movements careful. Amani poured and greeted each person with the same measured respect as if nothing had changed. When one customer sneered, "So, this is where thieves find work now," Amani answered calmly. "This is where wine is sold. If you want gossip, the square is that way." The man flushed and paid. Not everyone did. By mid-morning, Mr. Bello returned louder than before, his confidence inflated by an audience. He drank deeply, laughed too hard, and made a show of wiping his mouth as if doing the hut a favor. "I see you've found yourself a helper," he said, eyes sliding toward Sadia. "Does she count the money too, or does she pocket it?" A few men snorted. Sadia's fingers tightened around the cup she was holding, but she did not look up. "You owe from yesterday," Amani said, simply placing the tally board on the table. Bello leaned back, spreading his arms. "Ah, the famous board. You villagers and your scratches. I told you, put it on my name." "Your name isn't a purse," Amani replied. "Pay." The hut seemed to shrink around them. One of Bello's companions shifted uneasily. The other watched Sadia with a grin that made her skin crawl. Bello stood slow and theatrical, as if rising from a throne. He stepped closer to Sadia, his breath sour with drink. "Little jewel girl," he murmured, still pretending to be clean. Before Sadia could move, Amani placed himself between them. He did not raise his voice. He did not touch Bello. He simply stood. "Speak to me," he said, not to her. For a long moment the men stared at each other. Then Bello laughed, sharp and hollow, and tossed 2 coins onto the floor. "Take that," he said, "and be grateful." He turned to leave. Sadia moved before she could stop herself. She knelt, picked up the coins, and placed them carefully on the table. "Sir," she said, her voice trembling but clear, "you drank 3 calabashes. This is not enough." The room froze. Bello turned slowly. "You count now, I serve," Sadia replied. "And I count." The words surprised even her. They stood between them like a fragile wall. For a heartbeat, she feared he would strike her. Instead, he spat on the ground and stormed out, knocking a cup from the shelf. It shattered the sound, echoing long after he was gone. Amani exhaled slowly. "You stood straight," he said again. That afternoon the mockery grew bolder. Boys ran past the hut, shouting, "Free wine." thief's wine dust kicked up around the doorway. Oh, Amani closed the door and sat heavily on his stool, his head in his hands. Sadia knelt in front of him. "Let me help," she said again. "We can make the syrup now. The fishers come early. They pay fairly." He looked at her, something like gratitude softening his eyes. "We," he said quietly. They worked late into the night, boiling and stirring, their shadows dancing against the clay walls. Outside, the drums began to practice for the coming festival of the new moon. The village was preparing to celebrate, unaware of the storm it had already set in motion. The next day brought the communal sweeping. The talking drum announced it at dawn, its rhythm carrying the elders' command to every corner of Aquanza. All paths were to be cleared, all lanterns lit. No one was exempt. Sadia cut herself a broom from dry palm fronds and joined Amani as he walked toward the square. The closer they came, the tighter her chest grew. Faces turned, voices lowered. At the old silk cotton tree, Mama Isa, one of the kinder women, whispered, "Come here, child. Sweep with us." Sadia took a step forward. "Wait." Bello's voice cut through the morning. He stood with his arms crossed, a satisfied smile on his face. "This path is for honest hands," he announced. "Thieves can clean the gutters." A murmur rose. Some people shifted uncomfortably. Others nodded. Sadia swallowed and turned towards the gutter where dark water pooled and old trash clung stubbornly to the earth. She bent and began to sweep. Each stroke measured, her jaw set tight. Insults rained down softly, at first then louder. Wash with tears, someone laughed. A boy kicked a heap of filth toward her. It splashed her skirt. Laughter cracked open the air. Sadia's hands shook. She tasted salt and realized she was biting her lip to keep from crying. Enough. Amani's voice was not loud, but it carried. He stepped forward, lantern raised. "A village that mocks a child wounds its own feet," he said. "You will all walk with that pain." Bello scoffed. "Palm wine philosopher. Go climb your trees." Amani met his gaze. "I will," he said. "And I will still see you from there." The sweeping ended in strained silence. As people drifted away, Sadia stood alone for a moment. Her skirt wet her heart heavy. Then she straightened and walked beside Amani, back toward the river where the water carried secrets without judgment. Behind them, unseen but restless guilt was beginning to stir in the heart of a boy who had lied once too often. The days that followed settled into a tense, fragile rhythm. Sadia learned quickly that life after disgrace did not move forward, it circled. Each morning began with work each afternoon, with whispers each night, with the quiet question of how much longer the village would tolerate her presence near its edges. Yet, inside the palm grove, something steadier was growing. Amani's hut became a place governed by simple rules. Rise early, work, honestly, speak plainly. Sadia found comfort in the predictability. She swept the floor until the sand lay smooth and obedient. She boiled water, washed cups, learned how to judge the readiness of palm wine by smell and sound. Amani taught without lecturing, correcting with a glance, encouraging with silence. He never asked her to explain herself. That, more than anything, felt like mercy. But the village did not forget. Children followed her when she went to the river, singing the nickname that had already begun to rot her name. Men stared too long. Women watched with narrowed eyes, measuring her against their own daughters, their own fears. Even kindness came wrapped in pity, and pity cut almost as deeply as cruelty. One afternoon, as Sadia carried empty calabashes to the river, she heard familiar laughter ahead. Her steps slowed. She knew that sound. Kofi stood near the square with a cluster of boys, his shoulders thrown back, his voice loud and confident, as if confidence itself could erase memory. When he saw Sadia, something flickered across his face, fear, perhaps, or guilt, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "Tell it again," one boy urged him. "How you caught her sneaking." Kofi smirked. "She always liked to peep," he said. "I warned Baba. He didn't listen." The words slid into Sadia's ears like thorns. Her chest tightened. For a moment, she imagined screaming the truth, tearing open the lie in front of everyone. But truth without proof was a wounded bird. It fluttered. It fell. She lowered her head and walked past. The boys clapped and laughed as if she had performed for them. That night, the talking drum announced preparations for the festival of the new moon. The village buzzed with anticipation. Festivals made people bold. Music loosened tongues. Old grudges found new stages. Amani noticed the tension in Sadia's shoulders as they closed the hut. "Storms are coming," he said quietly. "Not all of them bring rain." 2 nights later, the wind rose without warning. It began as a restless whisper through the palms, then grew into sharp slaps against the walls. Leaves skittered across the ground. The river churned dark and impatient. Amani moved quickly, bringing full calabashes inside, stacking them carefully like sleeping children. Sadia tied the tally slate to a beam, double-knotting the cloth with trembling fingers. "Storms do 2 things," Amani said over the wind. "They break what is weak. They wash what is true." The night deepened. Long after the village lights dimmed, shadows gathered outside the hut. Sadia sensed it before she heard it, the air tightening, the silence sharpening. Then came the sound of feet on sand. A hissed whisper. A sudden violent crash as the door burst inward. 3 figures rushed inside, faces wrapped in cloth sticks raised. The lamp flickered wildly, throwing jagged shapes across the walls. "Where's the money?" One shouted, his voice too loud to belong to courage. "There is no money here," Amani said. Stepping forward, his chest lifted, his eyes calm. "We keep accounts, not piles." "Break the gourds," another barked. The first blow landed with a sickening crack. A calabash shattered, white sap spilling across the floor like a wound. The smell of fresh palm wine turned sharp, almost bitter. Another stick swung, then another. Glassy sounds filled the room as gourds split and died. Sadia's heart leapt into her throat. She ran for the tally slate, the proof of everything, the record that kept lies from growing wings. A stick whistled past her ear, smashing a shelf. Another struck her arm, pain exploding, bright and sudden. She clutched the slate tighter. "Leave the girl," one of the men muttered, uneasy. "She's nothing," another snapped. Amani moved, then fast and decisive, placing himself between Sadia and the blows. A stick struck his shoulder with brutal force. His jaw clenched, but he did not fall. He pushed one attacker back with the solid strength of a man who had spent his life climbing trees and trusting his balance. The man stumbled, shocked at meeting resistance. Out Amani barked, his voice cutting through the chaos like stone. For a heartbeat, the attackers hesitated. Somewhere beyond the hut, a dog barked. The village stirred. Fear replaced bravado. They smashed 2 more gourds for spite, then fled into the night, their footsteps swallowed by the wind. Silence crashed down heavier than the noise had been. Sadia slid to the floor, her back against the wall, the slate clutched to her chest. Her breath came in ragged bursts. Amani dropped to his knees beside the spilled sap and pressed his palm into it as if greeting a fallen friend. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough. Sadia lifted her arm. Blood threaded down her skin, bright but shallow. Amani tore a strip from his shirt and wrapped her arm with careful hands. "Hold," he said. She held. When the bleeding slowed, they surveyed the damage. Nearly a third of the stock lay in ruins. The floor glistened with loss. For a moment, Amani's shoulders sagged, the weight finally visible. Then he straightened. He found the broom. Without a word, he began to sweep. Sadia rose unsteadily and joined him. They worked in silence, reclaiming the room piece by piece, breath by breath. When the last shard was gathered and the sap soaked into the sand, Amani sat heavily on the stool, his head tilted back, eyes closed. "It was Bello," Sadia whispered. Amani opened his eyes. "We do not accuse without proof," he said, "but we remember marks." The festival arrived anyway. Color flooded the village. Drums thundered. Dancers stamped the dust into clouds. Smoke from suya fires curled upward like prayers learning how to write. Sadia wore her one good dress, mended carefully by the midwife's tiny patient stitches. Her arm ached beneath its clean bandage, a quiet reminder of the night's truth. Amani set up a smaller stall near the river path. They could not bring much wine, but they brought enough to stand without shame. The mockery returned, dressed in laughter and music. "Wine from a thief's hands," someone announced loudly. "Does stolen sweetness taste better?" a woman called. Sadia poured. She wiped cups. She thanked those who paid. Gratitude, she had decided, was a habit worth keeping even when it burned. Then Bello appeared, dressed for the festival, gold rings flashing confidence, puffed up by an audience. He smiled broadly, as if nothing had happened. "Palm wine," he said. 4 calabashes. "You have 3 unpaid," Amani replied, meeting his gaze. "Pay first." The crowd leaned in hungry. Bello laughed. "Do you forget who I am?" "I forget nothing," Amani said. "You owe." Bello turned his attention to Sadia, aiming for the softer target. "Little thief," he murmured, "you turn men against their betters." Something shifted inside Sadia then. The night of broken gourds, the pain in her arm, the way Amani had stood. "I serve honest wine," she said clearly. "I will not pour for a debt." The words fell into the air and held. Laughter burst, not cruel this time, but clean, the kind that shrank arrogance down to its true size. Bello flushed, his smile cracking. He raised a hand, then remembered the elders nearby, the watching drum. "Keep your sour sap," he spat, retreating too quickly. As the day wore on, they sold out. Not because everyone loved them, but because enough did. At dusk, as they carried the empty gourds home, Amani spoke softly. "You were brave." "I was afraid," Sadia admitted. "Bravery is walking with fear," he said. "You walked." Behind them, unseen, the village was already preparing for a reckoning it could no longer avoid. The night after the festival raid did not bring rest. It brought echoes. Sadia lay awake on her mat, listening to the palms sigh above the hut and the river murmur in the distance. Each sound felt sharper now, as if the world had learned how easily it could be broken. Her arm throbbed beneath the bandage, not enough to make her cry out, but enough to keep her awake. Pain, she discovered, was stubborn. It stayed even when fear tried to leave. Across the hut, Amani sat on his low stool long after the lamp had dimmed. He did not sleep either. The loss of the gourds weighed on him, but heavier still was the knowledge that someone had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. In villages like Akwansa, insults could be swallowed, rumors endured. Violence changed the rules. When dawn finally came, it came thin and uncertain. They did not speak much as they worked. Sadia swept the floor again, slower this time, careful with her injured arm. Amani counted what remained of their stock, his chalk making smaller numbers than before. Each mark was a reminder of what had been taken, but also of what had survived. By mid-morning, the village had noticed. People passed the hut more often than usual, pretending to be on other errands. Some peered inside, expecting to see ruin, defeat, maybe tears. They found none of those things. They found 2 people working quietly as if nothing had changed. That unsettled them. "Did you hear?" one woman whispered loudly near the path. "Thieves broke into the palm wine seller's hut, and they still didn't chase the girl away." Another replied, clicking her tongue. "Some men enjoy trouble." Sadia heard every word. She always did. But she had learned something important in the night since her exile. Words only grew powerful when you fed them. She did not. Late that afternoon, as Sadia went to the river to rinse the last of the cups, she felt it again, that tightening in her chest that came before humiliation. Voices drifted toward her, careless and familiar. Kofi. He stood with his friends near the market path, tossing stones into the dust, laughing too loudly. When he saw her, the laughter faltered for a breath, then returned harder than before. "Look who it is," one boy called. "The palm wine queen." Kofi smirked, though his eyes avoided hers. "She found her place," he said. "Serving men now." The boys laughed, relieved to be cruel together. Sadia stopped. For the first time since the square, she did not lower her head. She looked at her brother, really looked at him. The boy she had once shared secrets with. The boy who had held her hand when their mother died. The boy who now stood wrapped in a lie too big for him to carry. Her mouth opened, the truth pressed against her tongue, hot and urgent. But then she saw it, the fear flickering beneath Kofi's bravado. The way his fingers twitched, the way his laughter sounded forced. He was not free. He was trapped inside his own cowardice. Sadia closed her mouth. She turned and walked on. Behind her, the laughter cracked, unsure of itself. That evening, Amani noticed a change in her. "You saw him," he said. "Yes," she replied. "Did you speak no?" He nodded once. "Silence can be a blade," he said, when used at the right time. The days rolled forward heavy with anticipation. The village buzzed with unresolved tension. Some people began to avoid Bello openly. Others clung to him harder, drawn to the familiar comfort of arrogance. Children sensed the shift and grew quieter, their songs losing their edge. Then came the morning the market truly exploded. It began with a shout, sharp, accusing, unmistakable. "Thief!" The word ripped through the air like torn cloth. Sadia was arranging cups when she heard it. Her body went cold. Instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to prepare for another round of public disgrace. But the voice was not calling her name. The crowd surged toward the center of the market. Amani set down the gourd in his hands slowly. "Stay," he told Sadia. But she was already moving. They reached the edge of the gathering, just as strong hands dragged a struggling figure into view. Cloth spilled onto the ground, bright, expensive fabric, crushed and dirty now. A trader from the city stood red-faced and furious, pointing with a trembling hand. "I saw him," the man shouted. "My own eyes." He took it. The figure on the ground twisted, trying to break free. It was Kofi. Sadia's breath left her body in a rush. Kofi's friends hovered nearby, pale and shaken. One tried to slip away, only to be grabbed by another traitor. The crowd pressed in, hungry for blood or truth, they did not care which. "It wasn't me," Kofi shouted. "It's a lie." The traitor kicked the fabric toward him. "Then how did this get under your shirt?" The murmurs began. Sadia's name floated through the air like a ghost. "It's that girl again. She teaches him." Before the lie could land, a voice cut through the noise. "No." Mama Isa stepped forward, her back straight despite her age. "I saw him take it," she said. "Not the girl, the boy." Others nodded, emboldened. "Yes, I saw it too." The crowd stilled, confused. For the first time, the story refused to bend. Kofi's face collapsed. He looked around wildly, searching for escape, for sympathy, for anything. His eyes landed on Sadia at the edge of the crowd. For a heartbeat, he looked like the boy she remembered. Then fear twisted him again. It was her, he cried desperately. "My sister, she made me." "She is not here, Mama." Isa snapped. "And your lie is tired." The elders were summoned. The traitor demanded judgment. The crowd dragged Kofi and his friends toward the square, the same square where Sadia's life had shattered. Word ran fast. By the time Sadia and Amani reached the square, it was already boiling with voices. Baba Musa pushed through the crowd, His face flushed, his breath uneven. "My son," he cried. "Release him." The eldest elder raised his staff. "We will hear the truth." Kofi knelt in the dust, his shoulders shaking. His friends wept openly now, the weight of consequence crushing their bravado. "Speak," the elder commanded. Kofi opened his mouth. No lie came out. His head dropped. Silence fell. It was the heaviest sound Sadia had ever heard. "Yes," Kofi sobbed at last. "I took the cloth. I took the jewel before that. I lost it gambling. I lied. I blamed my sister." The square exploded. Gasps, cries, shouts of anger and shame collided. People who had laughed at Sadia covered their mouths. Others stared at Baba Musa accusation, sharpening their eyes. Baba Musa staggered backward as if struck. His face drained of color. His lips trembled. "Sadia," he whispered. She stood beside Amani, her patched dress moving gently in the breeze. Tears filled her eyes, but her feet did not move. The elder's voice rang out. "The girl you cast out was innocent, and you chose lies over truth." Baba Musa fell to his knees. "Forgive me," he cried. "My daughter. Forgive me." Sadia's tears spilled freely now, but still she did not step forward. The village held its breath. Justice had arrived. But mercy had not yet spoken. The square did not quiet after Kofi's confession. If anything, the noise deepened, thickened, turning from mockery into something heavier reckoning. People shouted over one another, some in anger, some in disbelief, some in sudden, uncomfortable remorse. The lie that had lived so easily among them was now exposed, writhing in the dust. Kofi remained on his knees, shoulders shaking, his hands clenched as if he could still hold on to denial. His friends stood behind him, eyes downcast, stripped of their courage now that truth had found a voice. The traitor crossed his arms and waited his patience, long exhausted. Baba Musa knelt as well, his proud back bent in a way the village had never seen. His tears cut tracks through the dust on his face. Again and again he reached toward Sadia, calling her name like a prayer that had come too late. "My daughter," he sobbed. "Forgive me. I was blind. I was a fool." Sadia felt the words hit her like waves, one after another, relentless. Forgive, daughter, blind, fool. Each word carried years of absence with it, the nights she went hungry so Kofi could eat, the mornings she worked while he slept, the square where he had stood silent while she was condemned. Her legs trembled. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream. She wanted to collapse into the dust and let it swallow her whole. Instead, she stood. Amani's hand brushed her arm, steady and grounding. He did not pull her forward. He did not hold her back. He let the choice be hers. The elders struck their staffs against the ground, calling for order. Slowly, the crowd's roar softened into tense murmurs. The eldest among them rose his voice, carrying the weight of memory and law. "The truth has been spoken," he declared. "The boy is guilty. He stole. He lied. He destroyed his sister's name." A murmur of agreement rippled through the square. "The punishment," the elder continued, "will be decided." Fear surged through Baba Musa. He crawled forward on his knees, his dignity forgotten. "Please," he begged, his voice cracking, "not my son. He is all I have left." The elder looked at him sharply. "You had a daughter." The words landed like a blow. Baba Musa bowed, his head shaking. The crowd leaned in, eager, divided. Some demanded harsh punishment, eager to balance the scales. Others hesitated, remembering their own children, their own sins, hidden by luck rather than virtue. It was then that Baba Musa turned fully toward Sadia, desperation stripping away what pride remained. "He is your twin," he pleaded. "The same womb bore you both. If you let them punish him, it will be like killing him yourself. I beg you, not for me, but for him." The square gasped. All eyes swung to Sadia. Twin. The word pierced deeper than any insult had. She remembered being children together, sharing food, sharing secrets, sharing grief when their mother died. She remembered holding Kofi's hand through fever, through fear. She remembered believing that whatever happened, they would face it side by side. And she remembered standing alone in the square while he watched her fall. Tears blurred her vision. Her chest burned with confusion so sharp it felt like pain. Amani stepped closer, his voice low but urgent. "Sadia," he said softly for her alone, "listen to your heart, but do not forget what it has endured." She turned to him, eyes shining with unshed tears. "If they punish him," she whispered, "I will never sleep again. My heart will curse me." "And what of your heart all these years?" Amani asked gently, though the pain in his voice was clear. "Who stood for you when they called you thief? Who defended you when you were cast out? Not him, not your father. Only silence." His words were not cruel. They were true. Sadia covered her mouth, her body shaking. The crowd waited restless, hungry for an ending. "I am not like them," she said at last, her voice barely audible. "If I have suffered, then let my suffering have meaning." She stepped forward. The movement rippled through the square like electricity. "Elder," Sadia said, lifting her head despite the tears streaming down her face, "my brother is guilty. He wronged me more than anyone here. But I beg you, do not destroy him. Let him live. Let him learn." Gasps erupted. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. The eldest elder studied her for a long moment. The silence stretched heavy and fragile. Then he struck his staff against the ground. "So it shall be," he said. "The boy is guilty, but he will be spared. Not because of his father, not because of his own words, but because his sister has chosen mercy." The ropes binding Kofi were cut. Kofi collapsed forward, sobbing, his body folding in relief and shame. Baba Musa fell prostrate, crying Sadia's name over and over, his tears soaking the earth. Sadia turned away. Mercy, she realized, was not light. It did not lift you, it weighed you down. That night the village buzzed with conflicting voices. Some called Sadia foolish. Others whispered that she was more human than all of them combined. No one slept easily. Kofi did not come to her. When the square finally emptied, Amani led Sadia back to the grove in silence. The palms swayed above them, indifferent to human drama, their fronds whispering secrets to the stars. Inside the hut, Sadia sank onto the stool, her strength gone. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. "They will never stop," she whispered. "The mockery, the shame. My life is nothing but this." Amani crouched before her, his hands gripping hers firmly. His eyes glistened, unshed tears trembling at their edges. "Shame is what they throw," he said, his voice breaking. "Honor is what you carry, and your chest is heavy with honor, heavier than this whole village put together." She shook her head, exhausted. "I am so tired." "So am I," he admitted. "But you are not alone. You will never be alone again." She looked at him, then really looked at him and felt something shift. Not romance, not yet. Something deeper, recognition. "Who are you, Amani?" she whispered. He hesitated, his gaze drifting toward the dark palms beyond the door. For a moment it seemed as though he might speak. Instead he only said, "A man with roots deeper than they know." Sadia leaned into his chest and cried, her tears soaking into his shirt. This time his tears fell too. Outside the village slept uneasily. The lie was dead. But its consequences were only just beginning. The morning after the judgment arrived without celebration. There were no drums, no songs, no laughter to soften the air. The village of Akwansa woke slowly like a body bruised in its sleep. People stepped outside their homes with caution, eyes darting, measuring which truths were now safe to say out loud and which ones still burned the tongue. Sadia woke before dawn. Her body felt hollow, as if the tears of the night before had washed something essential out of her. Mercy had saved her brother, but it had not healed her. It had simply changed the shape of her pain. She sat on the edge of her mat, staring at her hands. These were the same hands that had swept floors, counted coins, carried water, and held on to dignity when everything else was stripped away. Yet now they trembled slightly, as if unsure what work remained for them to do. Outside, Amani was already awake. He moved quietly, as always careful not to disturb the fragile peace inside the hut. He had slept little. Mercy had disappointed him not because he doubted Sadia's heart, but because he knew the village too well. Mercy, in places like Akwansa, was often mistaken for weakness. They ate in silence that morning. No plans were discussed, no reassurances offered. Sometimes words only made the weight heavier. When Sadia stepped into the village later that day, the air shifted. People stared. Not with the old certainty, but with confusion. Some lowered their heads in shame. Others watched her with open curiosity, as if trying to understand how a girl they had so easily condemned now stood at the center of the village's greatest reckoning in years. A few smiled at her awkward, uncertain smiles that did not quite reach the eyes. But cruelty, once tasted, is not easily forgotten. Near the well, two women whispered loudly enough for her to hear. She should have let the boy pay, one said. Mercy spoils people, the other replied. Now see what happens. Sadia kept walking. At the market, Kofi stood apart from his friends, his posture smaller, his confidence gone. His wrists still bore faint marks where the ropes had been cut. When he saw Sadia, he hesitated, then turned away. He did not thank her. He did not apologize. The truth struck her harder than the square ever had. She had saved him, but she had not changed him. That realization followed her like a shadow as the day unfolded. By afternoon, the whispers sharpened again. Mr. Bellow's voice was among them, smooth and poisonous as ever. Though he kept his distance from Amani, now his influence had not disappeared. It had simply adapted. See how mercy works, he said to anyone who would listen. The thief is free. The girl still cries. Justice, ha! His laughter found willing ears. That evening, as Sadia and Amani closed the hut, a group of youths passed by, slowing just long enough to throw dust toward the doorway. Saint Sadia, one, shouted, "Save us all!" They ran off, laughing. Sadia's chest tightened. She said nothing, but Amani saw the way her shoulders stiffened. "They will push harder now," he said quietly. "They think you taught them that you can be pushed." "I won't break," she replied. The words were firm, but fear hid beneath them. That night sleep refused to come. The palms rustled uneasily, their shadows crawling across the hut walls like restless spirits. Sadia lay awake replaying every choice she had made. The square, her father's tears, Kofi's silence, the elder's staff striking the ground. Had she chosen mercy because it was right, or because she could not bear to be seen as cruel? The question burned. Before dawn, Amani rose and lit the lamp. He moved with purpose now, not his usual unhurried calm. When Sadia noticed, she sat up. "Where are you going?" she asked. "To end the watching," he said simply. She followed him without question. They walked past the river, beyond the paths Sadia knew, through a narrow trail swallowed by palms and brush. The further they went, the quieter the world became. Birds stirred overhead. The air changed a cleaner, cooler, carrying the scent of iron and stone. Then the trees opened. Sadia stopped so suddenly that her breath caught in her throat. Before her rose tall iron gates, black and gleaming, guarded by men standing straight and alert. Beyond them stretched a wide compound, white walls, red-tiled roofs, balconies, catching the early sun. Servants moved across the courtyard with quiet efficiency. Everything about the place spoke of order, power, and wealth so immense it did not need to shout. Her knees weakened. "Amani," she whispered, "what is this?" He turned to her, his face drawn, his eyes heavy with something close to sorrow. "This," he said, "is my home." The world tilted. "This is where I belong." He continued, each word measured. "I am not only a palm wine seller, I am the heir to the largest palm groves, warehouses, and trading routes in this region." Sadia stared at him, her heart pounding violently in her chest. All the insults, all the nights of hunger, all the laughter when they mocked him, mocked them. "You knew," she said, her voice trembling. "You knew who you were. And you let them do all of that." Pain crossed his face like a shadow. "I hid myself," he said, "because wealth attracts obedience, not truth. I needed to know who would stand with me when there was nothing to gain. And I was your test," she asked. The words tasted bitter. He stepped closer, stopping when she raised her hand. "No," he said urgently. "You were not a test. You were the answer. I did not ask you to suffer. I watched because I believed the truth would protect you." Tears spilled down Sadia's cheeks, fast and furious now. "It didn't," she said. "It broke me." Amani's voice cracked. "I know." For a long moment they stood in silence, the gates looming behind him like an accusation. "From today," he said finally, "no one will call you thief again. No one will throw shame at your feet and walk away laughing. I will stand openly with you." Sadia wiped her face with shaking hands. Her heart felt raw, exposed. Yet, beneath the pain, something else stirred, relief perhaps, or the beginning of justice. When the truth spread through Akwansa, it spread like fire. The palm wine seller was not just a man of the trees. He was a king in hiding. Mr. Bello shrank. The man who had once laughed loudest now avoided open spaces. When Amani's carriage passed the market, Bello turned his face away, fear tightening his smile. He gathered with Baba Musa and others who had once spoken cruelly, their voices hushed and uncertain. If he wanted revenge, one whispered, none of us would stand. Baba Musa sat with his head in his hands. "I begged my daughter on my knees," he said hoarsely. "What shame!" Fear replaced arrogance. Silence replaced laughter. But envy rose just as quickly. Women who had once spat at Sadia now whispered her name with bitterness. Some dressed brightly and appeared at the gates, hoping to be seen. Others cornered Sadia at the well, their words sharp. "Who are you to sit in a palace?" one demanded. "You belong in the gutter," another hissed. One afternoon, a jealous shove sent Sadia's water pot crashing to the ground, shattering. Before she could react, Amani appeared. "Enough," he said, his voice thunder without shouting. He pulled Sadia close, his presence undeniable. "This is the woman I love," he declared. "This is the woman I will marry. Respect her as you respect me, or leave my sight forever." Shame burned through the crowd. That night, alone in her room, Sadia cried again, not from humiliation this time, but from the overwhelming weight of change. Her life had turned upside down too many times to feel safe in joy, yet somewhere deep inside a quiet truth settled. The girl they had called thief had outgrown their lies, and the village, whether it liked it or not, would have to follow. The days after Amani revealed the truth about who he was did not bring peace. They brought noise of a different kind. Akwansa buzzed like a disturbed hive. Everywhere Sadia went, eyes followed her. Some looked with awe, others with resentment sharp enough to cut. The same mouths that once spat her name now shaped it, carefully tasting power in every syllable. The palm wine seller was a king, and the thief girl, she was chosen. So patience really does turn into gold. But admiration is often only envy wearing a softer face. Inside the large house beyond the iron gates, Sadia felt smaller than she ever had in the hut. The rooms were wide, the ceilings high, the floors smooth and cold beneath her feet. Servants moved quietly, respectfully, but their bows reminded her constantly that she no longer belonged to the simple life she understood. At night, she lay awake on a bed too soft, listening to silence that felt heavier than hunger. Amani noticed. "You don't have to stay here yet," he said one evening as they walked along the balcony overlooking the groves. "Nothing has been decided." Sadia stopped and turned to him. "Everything has been decided," she replied quietly. "The village decided for me long ago. Now they've decided again." Her voice held no accusation, only exhaustion. Below them, torches flickered as workers moved through the estate preparing for the next market day. Power lived here, real power, not the loud kind that Bello once wielded. Speaking of Bello, his silence had begun to worry people. The man who once ruled the square with laughter and poison now avoided it entirely. When Amani's name was mentioned, Bello's smile trembled. When Sadia passed nearby, he disappeared into crowds like a rat sensing fire. But humiliation, like mercy, has weight, and Bello had carried too much of it for too long. One afternoon, as the sun burned white overhead, Sadia returned briefly to the village market, with two maids determined not to disappear from the world she came from. She moved carefully, greeting vendors she once served beside buying small things with her own hands. Some bowed too low. Others looked away. Near the spice stalls, voices rose suddenly. "You think you're better now?" Sadia froze. 3 women stood before her, faces tight with jealousy. They were women who had once laughed loudest when she was cast out. "You sleep in palaces now," one said bitterly. "Does that erase who you were?" Sadia opened her mouth to answer, but another woman shoved her shoulder. The movement was quick, deliberate. "Careful," a maid warned. The woman scoffed. "She's not made of glass." Sadia steadied herself. Her heart pounded, but she refused to step back. "I never asked for your hatred," she said calmly. "I only asked for truth." Truth angered them more than defiance. One woman raised her hand. Before it could fall, the crowd parted. Amani stepped forward, his presence silencing the market like sudden rain. His eyes swept over the women, cold and unyielding. "This ends now," he said. "If you have grievances, bring them to me. If you touch her again, you answer to me." The women retreated, shame flashing briefly before being swallowed by fear. That night, Amani spoke plainly. "I have enemies," he told Sadia. "Not because I am cruel, but because I do not bend. Bello is one of them. He will not disappear quietly." Sadia nodded. "I know," and she did. Because 2 nights later the warning arrived. It came not with shouting or violence, but with fire. At the edge of the palm groves, one of Amani's storage sheds went up in flames. By the time guards arrived, the roof had collapsed, sending sparks into the sky like bitter stars. The message was clear. Amani stood before the smoking ruin, his face unreadable. Workers murmured angrily, calling for punishment, for names, for blood. "No," Amani said firmly. "We answer with law, not rage." Sadia watched him, then truly watched him, and understood for the first time the cost of power carried with restraint. It would have been easy for him to destroy Bello with a word. Harder to let justice walk its slow path. The next morning the village awoke to a summons. The elders had called an open council. Word spread quickly. Everyone knew why. The square filled again, but this time the energy was different. No hunger for scandal. Only fear, curiosity, and the uncomfortable weight of memory. Bello arrived late. He walked into the square with forced confidence, but the crowd did not part for him as it once had. Whispers followed his steps like insects. Amani stood at the center beside the elders. Sadia remained slightly behind him, her hands clasped tightly, her heart steady despite the storm gathering in her chest. "Speak," the eldest elder commanded. Amani did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "My store was burned," he said. "I do not accuse without proof, but the village must know this. Those who profit from lies and fear will always return to them when truth stands." Bello laughed weakly. "Are you accusing me? I'm reminding you," Amani replied, "that the old ways are over." The elder turned to Bello. "Do you deny involvement?" Bello hesitated. That hesitation was his undoing. From the edge of the crowd, a young man stepped forward. One of the men who had once followed Bello faithfully. His hands shook. "I carried the oil," he confessed. "He paid me." Gasps tore through the square. Bello's face drained of color. "You lie," he spat. But another man stepped forward. Then another. Fear had kept them loyal. Fear now turned on him. The elders struck their staffs. Mr. Bello, the eldest, said, his voice like iron, "You have sown enough poison. You will answer." Bello fell to his knees. Not with dignity, not with apology, with terror. Sadia watched him crumble and felt nothing. No joy, no triumph, only a quiet release like a door finally closing. The elders passed judgment. Bello would be stripped of his influence, his trading rights suspended, his name publicly marked. No blood, no spectacle, just consequence. As guards led him away, Bello looked up once at Sadia. For the first time there was no mockery in his eyes, only regret. The square dispersed slowly. People spoke in hushed tones. Children clung to their mothers. The village had learned something dangerous that day: lies could fall. Later, as dusk painted the sky in deep orange, Sadia stood alone near the old silk cotton tree. The same place where she had once been pushed toward the gutter. Amani joined her. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm learning," she replied. "Power doesn't heal everything. It only gives you space to heal yourself." He smiled faintly. "You were always wiser than this village deserved." She looked at him, then not as her protector, not as a king in hiding, but as a man who had chosen restraint when revenge was easy. "Amani," she said softly, "if I walk beside you, it won't be because you saved me." "I know," he replied. "It will be because you chose to stay." The moon rose slowly above Akwansa, round and bright. For the first time, it did not feel like it was watching a tragedy unfold. It felt like it was witnessing the beginning of something earned. The village did not return to normal after Bello's fall. It could not. Normal had been built on fear, on convenient lies, on the comfort of blaming the weak. With those things shaken loose, Akwansa stood awkwardly between what it had been and what it did not yet know how to become. For Sadia, the change was quieter and more painful. She moved back and forth between two worlds now. In the mornings, she walked through the palm groves with Amani, listening as he discussed harvest schedules, storage repairs, and routes for traders who would soon return, cautious but curious. In the afternoons, she insisted on visiting the village, checking on Mama Isa, greeting old customers standing in the same market that had once turned its back on her. Not everyone welcomed her. Some bowed too deeply. Some smiled too quickly. Some looked at her as if she were a mirror they could not bear to face. Her father, Baba Musa, did not know how to look at her at all. He came to the gates one evening, hat in hand, shoulders bent. The guards announced him quietly, unsure whether to turn him away. Sadia saw him from the balcony and felt a familiar tightening in her chest. She went down alone. He knelt the moment he saw her. "I don't deserve to stand," he said hoarsely, "but I had to come." Sadia said nothing. "I wake at night," he continued, his voice breaking, "and I hear your mother asking me why I did not protect you. I have no answer." Silence stretched between them. At last, Sadia spoke. "I cannot give you what you want yet. Baba Musa bowed his head lower. "I will wait," he said, "even if it takes the rest of my life." She turned and walked away before her resolve could falter. Mercy, she was learning, was not a single act. It was a long road, and sometimes it did not include reconciliation at all. Kofi did not come with his father. He avoided the groves, avoided the market when Sadia was present. The shame of exposure clung to him like smoke. The village no longer laughed with him. His friends had scattered, each trying to outrun the shadow of their own complicity. One afternoon, Sadia found him sitting alone near the river, throwing stones into the water with a dull precision. She stopped a few steps away. "Kofi," she said. He flinched, then looked up. His eyes were rimmed with red, his face thinner than she remembered. "I didn't ask you to save me," he muttered. "I know," she replied calmly. "You think you're better than me now," he said bitterly, "because you stood there and everyone clapped." Sadia shook her head. "They didn't clap. They watched." "There's a difference," he laughed harshly. "So what now?" "You forgive me and I become a good man." "That's not how forgiveness works," she said. "It doesn't change you. It just frees me from carrying your lie." Kofi stared at the river. "I don't know how to live with what I did. Neither do I," Sadia said softly. "But you will have to learn. Alone if necessary." She turned and left him there, understanding at last that saving someone did not mean staying beside them forever. As the weeks passed, preparations for rebuilding began. Amani ordered new storage sheds built farther from the groves, better guarded, stronger. He hired men from nearby villages, men without old loyalties, without grudges. This, too, unsettled Akwansa. "He brings outsiders," some whispered. "He doesn't trust us," others complained. Amani heard every word and answered none. One evening, as he and Sadia walked along the grove's edge, he spoke at last. "Trust is not owed," he said. "It is earned." The village spent years spending what it had not earned. Sadia nodded. And now, he replied, it must learn patience. That patience was tested sooner than expected. A trader from the city arrived with news routes once controlled by Bello's influence were unstable. Some merchants hesitated to return, fearing unrest. Others demanded guarantees, written contracts, guarded passage, visible authority. Power, Sadia realized, was not just inherited. It had to be proven again and again. Amani worked tirelessly. Meetings stretched late into the night. Decisions weighed heavy. He refused bribes, refused shortcuts, refused to rule by fear, even when it would have been easier. Sadia watched him closely. "You could crush them," she said one night as they reviewed ledgers by lamplight. "Everyone knows it." He looked up at her. "And become what they already fear." She understood then. His restraint was not weakness, it was choice. The wedding talk began quietly, then loudly. Women speculated, elders hinted, servants whispered behind hands. Some spoke with genuine happiness, others with thinly veiled resentment. Sadia felt the pressure pressing in from all sides. One night she confronted it. "If we marry," she said carefully, "they will say I endured only to be rewarded." Amani considered this. "And if we don't," he said, "they will say you were only protected, never chosen." She sighed. "There is no version where they don't talk." He smiled gently, then let them talk. "We will live." The decision when it came was simple. They would not rush. They would not hide. They would not apologize. The announcement was made at the square not with drums, but with clarity. Amani stood beside Sadia, not in front of her. "This woman was called a thief," he said. "She was innocent. She was cast out. She did not break. I did not save her. I stood with her. That is the truth." The village listened silent. "I will marry her," he continued, "because she chose honesty when lies were easier, mercy when vengeance was sweeter, and dignity when humiliation was loud." No one laughed. Some bowed their heads. Others looked away. That night, Sadia returned to the grove alone and stood beneath the palms. The moon filtered through the fronds, painting the ground with silver scars. She thought of her mother, of the girl she had been, of the woman she was becoming. For the first time, she did not feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was choosing, and that she knew was the truest victory of all. The announcement did not calm the village. It clarified it. In the days that followed Amani's public declaration, Akwansa seemed to split down an invisible line. On one side were those who accepted the truth with bowed heads and quiet relief. On the other were those who nodded politely while resentment fermented behind their smiles. Sadia felt it everywhere. When she walked through the market, greetings came slower. Compliments sounded careful measured. Some women who had once ignored her now praised her strength too loudly, as if volume could replace sincerity. Others watched her with narrowed eyes, calculating what her rise meant for their own daughters, their own chances. She understood then that dignity did not silence comparison. It invited it. Amani, meanwhile, faced a different kind of resistance. His refusal to rule through fear unsettled men who had grown comfortable under Bello's shadow. They mistook kindness for softness, restraint for delay. One afternoon, a group of traders confronted him near the rebuilt storage sheds. "You are changing too much too fast," one man said cautiously. "Stability needs firm hands," another added. "A leader who listens too much risks losing control." Amani listened without interrupting. When they finished, he spoke evenly. Control built on fear collapses the moment fear finds a stronger voice. "I am not interested in ruling ruins." Some nodded, others left unconvinced. That evening, Sadia joined him by the river. She had learned to find him there when the weight grew heavy. The water moved steadily indifferent to human ambition. "They're afraid," she said. "Yes," Amani replied. "But not of change. They're afraid of losing excuses." She smiled faintly. "You always make it sound simple." "It isn't," he said, "but it's necessary." The next test came sooner than either of them expected. A trader from the southern route arrived at dawn with troubling news. A group of men, former allies of Bello, had begun demanding fees from travelers passing near the old road. They claimed it was for protection. Everyone knew better. The old poison, Sadia murmured. Amani's jaw tightened. It spreads when people think no one is watching. Instead of sending guards immediately, Amani called the elders. This decision shocked many. "You invite them into power again," one warned. They failed before another argued. "Why trust them now?" Amani met their eyes calmly. "Because rebuilding without accountability is just repainting a broken wall." The elders agreed reluctantly. The meeting in the square that followed was tense. Villagers gathered curious and wary. Sadia stood beside Amani, her presence quiet but steady. When the men accused of extortion were brought forward, they did not kneel. They laughed. "We're only doing what kept this village alive before one sneered." Fear keeps order. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sadia felt the old anger stir. She remembered how easily fear had devoured her name. She stepped forward before Amani could speak. "Fear does not keep order," she said clearly. "It keeps silence." And silence protected lies. The square stilled. The men scoffed, but their laughter wavered. This time the crowd did not join them. An elder raised his staff. "The girl speaks truth. We allowed fear to speak for us once. We will not again." Judgment was swift. The men were stripped of any claim to authority and banished from the trade routes, not beaten, not shamed publicly, simply removed. As they were led away, one turned back, eyes burning. "This village will regret growing soft." Sadia met his gaze without flinching. "No," she said quietly, "it will regret growing late." That night the square buzzed with uneasy energy. Some praised the decision. Others whispered of danger to come. But beneath the noise something had shifted. People had chosen truth over comfort. For Sadia, the change was internal as well. She began spending mornings with the children near the grove, teaching them to read simple words using charcoal and scraps of paper. At first, only a few came, mostly girls, their eyes cautious, hopeful. Soon, more followed. One afternoon, a young girl asked her, "Did it hurt when they called you a thief?" Sadia paused. "Yes," she answered honestly, "but it hurt more when I believed them." The girl nodded, absorbing the lesson with solemn understanding. Baba Musa watched these gatherings from a distance. He did not approach. He did not interrupt. Each day he brought small offerings, fruit firewood, once a new slate, and left them quietly near the grove. Sadia noticed. She said nothing. Healing, she was learning, did not require conversation. Sometimes it only required consistency. Kofi left the village shortly after. No announcement, no farewell. He came to the grove at dawn one morning, stood at the edge and waited until Sadia noticed him. "I'm going to the city," he said awkwardly. "There's work on the docks." She studied his face. The arrogance was gone. What remained was uncertainty and something like humility still unformed. "I won't stop you," she said. "I don't expect forgiveness," he added quickly. I don't want to stay where everyone remembers me as a lie." "That's fair," Sadia replied. "Just remember, running doesn't erase who you were. It only gives you space to decide who you'll become." He nodded once, then turned and walked away. She watched until he disappeared. The wedding preparations began slowly, deliberately. Sadia insisted on simplicity where possible. She did not want her story buried beneath excess. Amani agreed. They chose to honor the village, not impress it. Still, the scale was unlike anything Akwansa had seen. Cloth was dyed in rich blues and warm golds. Drummers practiced until their hands ached. Dancers came from neighboring villages. Food was prepared in quantities that seemed impossible. Yet, through it all, Sadia kept her routine. She swept, she taught, she listened. One evening, as she sat alone beneath the palms, Mama Isa joined her. "You have changed," the older woman said gently. Sadia smiled. "So has the village," Mama Isa nodded. "Not all of it, but enough." The night before the wedding, Sadia dreamed of her mother. Not as she had been at the end, but as she was in the mornings, laughing softly, tying her scarf, humming without realizing it. "You kept your back straight," her mother said in the dream. Sadia woke with tears on her cheeks and peace in her chest. The dawn that followed felt different. It carried weight, it carried promise, and for the first time since the lie had been spoken in the square, Sadia did not brace herself for what might come. She welcomed it. The wedding day did not begin with celebration. It began with tension. From the first light of dawn, Akwansa felt like a village holding its breath. Women rose early to light fires and stir pots heavy with rice and spice. Drummers tested skins with cautious taps. Children ran barefoot through the dust, excitement fighting with unease. Too much had changed too quickly. Too many old wounds had been reopened and stitched without everyone's consent. Sadia woke before anyone came to dress her. She sat alone by the window, her hands folded in her lap, listening to the distant sounds of preparation. The dress lay across a wooden chair behind her beautiful yes, but not what unsettled her. What unsettled her was the knowledge that today would seal everything. Not just her marriage, but her place in the village's memory. Once they had called her thief. Today they would call her bride. Both names carried weight. A soft knock came at the door. Mama Isa entered, her eyes shining. "It's time," she said gently. As the women gathered to dress, Sadia. Laughter filled the room, but it was cautious laughter, careful not to spill into excess. Coral beads were placed around her neck. Her hair was braided slowly, reverently, as if each strand carried its own story. When the final cloth was draped around her shoulders, Sadia barely recognized the woman staring back at her. She looked strong. Outside, the square filled. Amani arrived first, standing tall in ceremonial attire that marked his lineage openly for the first time. No disguise, no humility worn like armor, just truth. The elders nodded as he passed. Some bowed slightly, others stiffly. Respect and regret mingled uneasily. Then the murmurs began. Baba Musa appeared at the edge of the crowd. He wore his best clothes, but they hung loosely on him now, as if shame had stolen his weight. People parted instinctively, unsure whether to honor him as a father or judge him as a man who had failed his child. He stopped near the front and stood there, hands trembling, eyes fixed on the empty space where Sadia would soon walk. Behind him, whispers rose. Does he deserve to be here? He knelt too late, but he is still her father. Before those questions could settle, another figure stumbled into the square. Kofi. No one had expected him. He looked thinner than before, his clothes worn from travel. His eyes darted nervously as if he might flee at any moment. The crowd shifted, surprised and uncomfortable. Some hissed under their breath. Others stared openly. He stopped several paces behind Baba Musa, his shoulders slumped. I had to come, he muttered to no one in particular. The drumming slowed, the air tightened. This was not part of the plan. Amani noticed immediately. His jaw tightened, but he did not move. He glanced toward the path where Sadia would appear. She was already walking. When Sadia stepped into the square, the world seemed to tilt. The music resumed, stronger now, filling the space between past and present. She walked slowly, her steps measured, her chin lifted. Tears glistened on more than one face as people watched her pass, some from joy, others from shame. Then her eyes met her father's. Baba Musa dropped to his knees. The movement rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Gasps rose. Someone cried out softly. "My daughter," he said, his voice breaking. "Before all these people, before God and the earth, forgive me." The drumming faltered. Sadia stopped. The silence that followed was unbearable. Every eye turned toward her. This was the moment the village would remember. She looked at her father, the man who had raised her, fed her, then destroyed her with a lie he never questioned. She saw the years carved into his face, the regret that no longer hid behind pride. Then she looked past him. At Kofi. He stood frozen, his hands clenched, his eyes wet and afraid. For the first time since childhood, he looked small. "I came to beg," he said hoarsely, "not for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I came to say the truth in front of everyone one last time." The elders stirred uneasily. Kofi swallowed hard. "I stole the jewel. I lied. I watched my sister be ruined, and I stayed silent. Everything good that happens to her now, I tried to destroy." A murmur spread through the crowd, heavy, sobering. Sadia felt her heart pound painfully in her chest. The past rose up inside her like a flood, the square, the gutter, the laughter, the hunger. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, her voice was steady. "Stand up, Baba." Her father hesitated, then rose shakily to his feet. She turned to Kofi. "And you? Step back." He obeyed immediately, shame burning across his face. Sadia faced the crowd. "Today is not about my suffering," she said clearly. "It is not about my father's failure or my brother's guilt. Those truths are already known." The square remained silent. "Today is about what we choose to build after truth is spoken." She walked forward until she stood before Baba Musa. "I forgive you," she said. not because what you did was small, but because I refused to carry it into my future." A sob tore from her father's chest as he collapsed forward, pressing his forehead to the dust. Sadia did not turn back. She continued walking. Amani stepped forward and took her hand. The drums thundered. The ceremony began. As vows were spoken, the village listened not just with ears, but with memory. When Amani promised to stand beside Sadia in truth, and she promised to walk with him without fear, the words felt heavier than any gold. When the elders blessed the union, their voices trembled not from ritual but from understanding. This marriage was not a reward, it was a reckoning. The celebration that followed was unlike anything Akwansa had known. Dancers filled the square. Food was shared freely. Laughter rose not sharp this time, but warm, uncertain learning how to be kind again. Baba Musa remained at the edge watching. He did not approach. He did not intrude. He simply watched his daughter laugh for the first time in years. Kofi left before sunset. He did not say goodbye. Sadia saw him once standing near the old road, looking back at the village as if measuring whether he would ever return. Then he turned and walked away, carrying his shame into a future he would have to earn. As night fell and the moon climbed high, Amani and Sadia stood together beneath the palms, the noise of celebration fading into the background. "You did not owe them that," Amani said softly. "I know," Sadia replied, "but I owed myself peace." He smiled, pride and love mingling in his eyes. The village of Akwansa danced late into the night. But beneath the drums and songs, something deeper had changed. For the first time, truth had not been punished. It had been honored. The days after the wedding were quieter than anyone expected. Not because joy was missing, but because the village of Akwansa did not yet know how to sit with justice that had not demanded blood. Celebration had ended. Drums were stored. Visitors returned to their homes. What remained was memory, and memory is a demanding guest. Sadia moved into Amani's house fully now, not as a symbol, but as a woman learning how to live inside a new reality. Servants bowed, careful and respectful, yet she insisted on learning their names, their families, their routines. Some were confused by this, others softened. Power, she understood, could isolate if handled carelessly. Each morning, she still walked to the grove. Not because she had to, but because it reminded her who she was before truth found her voice. Children followed her now, curious and unafraid. Girls, especially, watched her closely, as if searching her face for permission to hope. One afternoon, a young girl tugged at her dress. "Auntie Sadia," she asked, "will they still call me poor if I work hard?" Sadia knelt to her level. "They might," she said honestly. "But poverty is not the same as worth. Never confuse the two." The girl nodded solemnly, clutching the lesson like a seed. Amani watched these moments quietly. He saw how people responded to Sadia, not with fear, not even with envy anymore, but with trust. It unsettled him more than hostility ever had. Trust meant responsibility. "You are becoming the heart of this place," he told her one evening. She smiled faintly. "I don't want to rule." "You already do," he replied gently, without force. Not everyone welcomed that. In the weeks that followed, whispers began again, not cruel this time, but cautious. Some men complained that things were changing too fast. Others muttered that women were becoming too bold. Old fears tried to reassert themselves under new language. Then came the test no one had prepared for. A dispute broke out between two families over land near the old cinema, the same place where Kofi's lie had once begun. Voices rose, accusations flew. By evening, stones had been thrown and blood nearly spilled. The elders called for Amani. He listened. He weighed. He asked questions. But before judgment could be passed, Sadia stepped forward. "Let me speak to them," she said. The elders hesitated. "This is not women's business," one muttered. Amani's eyes hardened. "Justice is everyone's business." Sadia walked into the crowd unarmed, unguarded. She stood between the families, her voice calm but unwavering. "You are both right," she said, stunning them, "and you are both wrong." She listened to old grievances, to buried resentment, to pride disguised as principle. She did not rush them. She did not scold them. When she finally spoke again, the crowd was silent. "This land has already taken too much from this village," she said. "It took truth once. It almost took blood today. If you fight over it, it will take more. But if you share it, it can feed your children instead." The family stared at her stunned. No one had suggested sharing before. After a long pause, one man lowered his head, then the other followed. The crisis ended without violence. That night, Amani looked at her differently. "You did what power cannot," he said softly. "I only remembered how it felt to have no one listen," she replied. News of that moment spread beyond Akwansa. Nearby villages began sending people not to mock, not to threaten, but to ask questions. How had this village changed so quickly? How had a girl once called a thief become the voice people trusted? Sadia answered each visitor the same way. "Truth grows when it is protected," she said, "not when it is shouted." Baba Musa came less often now, but when he did, it was with quiet humility. He worked in the grove alongside other men, never asking for recognition. Sometimes Sadia watched him from a distance, her heart heavy but no longer bleeding. Forgiveness, she realized, did not always mean closeness. Sometimes it meant peace without reunion. One evening a letter arrived. It was from the city, Kofi. His handwriting was rough, uncertain. He wrote of long days on the docks, of sore hands and harder nights. He wrote that no one there knew his past, and that for the first time he was learning to carry his name without hiding. At the end, one line stood out: "I don't ask to come back. I just wanted you to know I am trying to become someone who deserves to be your brother." Sadia folded the letter carefully and placed it beneath her pillow. Tears came not of pain, but of release. The village continued to change slowly now, like a river carving new paths rather than flooding old ones. Girls spoke more openly. Elders listened longer. Men learned awkwardly, imperfectly, that authority did not have to mean cruelty. One night, standing beneath the palms, Amani took Sadia's hands. "You could have chosen revenge," he said, "or silence, or comfort." She met his gaze. "I chose meaning." He nodded. "Then this place will never be the same again." Above them, the moon rose full and steady, no longer watching a girl being cast out, but a woman who had transformed the weight of injustice into something stronger than gold. The village of Akwansa had not become perfect, but it had become awake. Time did what judgment alone never could. It softened some edges. It hardened others. Months passed, and Akwansa learned to live with the consequences of truth. Not all wounds closed. Some became scars, visible reminders that the village had once chosen fear over fairness. But scars, unlike open wounds, allowed movement. Sadia moved freely now, not because everyone loved her, but because no one could deny her place anymore. She walked through the market without whispers following her footsteps. When she spoke, people listened, not with awe, not with suspicion, but with attention. That was the rarest form of respect. She refused titles. When elders suggested naming her Mother of the New Village, she shook her head. "I am not a symbol," she said gently. "I am a woman who learned the cost of silence." Instead, she worked. She helped establish a small learning circle under the palms where girls and boys learned to read, count, and speak without fear of ridicule. She sat among them, not above them. When mistakes were made, she corrected them softly. When confidence grew, she smiled, but did not claim credit. Amani watched this quietly, often from a distance. "You are building something that cannot be owned," he said one evening as they walked along the river. "That is the only kind worth building," she replied. Their marriage was steady, not dramatic. No grand displays, no need to prove anything. They disagreed sometimes about trade routes, about how quickly to push change, but never about values. Power had tested them both. It had not broken them. From the city came occasional letters. Kofi wrote less often now, but when he did, his words were clearer. He spoke of learning a craft, of sending a little money back to Baba Musa anonymously, of waking each day with purpose rather than hunger for shortcuts. Sadia did not reply every time. She had learned that forgiveness did not require constant reassurance. Baba Musa aged quickly. Regret had carved deeper lines into his face than time alone ever could. He no longer spoke publicly. He worked, he listened. When Sadia passed, he greeted her respectfully, never asking for closeness. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, he approached her by the grove. "I am ill," he said quietly. Sadia studied him. He looked smaller now, fragile. "I do not ask you to care for me," he continued, "only to know that I see you. I see who you became despite me." She nodded. "That is enough," she said. When he died, months later, the village mourned him with restraint. He was remembered as a man who failed and learned too late, but learned nonetheless. Sadia stood at the burial composed. She wept later alone, not from unresolved pain, but from release. The village did not turn backward after that. If anything, it leaned forward. Disputes were brought to open councils more often. Girls spoke sooner. Boys learned that silence in the face of injustice was not neutrality, it was participation. Sadia never reminded them. She didn't need to. Her story had already done that work. One evening, as the dry season cooled and the air smelled of dust and promise, Amani and Sadia sat beneath the palms watching children chase fireflies. "Do you ever think about leaving?" Amani asked quietly. She considered the question. The world beyond Ekwansa was wide, safer in some ways, easier. "No," she said finally. "Leaving would mean a live life." He smiled. "Then we stay." Years later, when people spoke of the turning point in Ekwansa, they did not mention the jewel or the fire or the wedding. They spoke of the day a girl stood in the square and refused to carry a lie into her future. They spoke of how justice came not loud, not violent, but firm, patient. They spoke of Sadia, and the children, hearing the story, learned something their parents never taught. Dignity does not need permission. The truth, once protected, multiplies. And that kindness, when chosen deliberately, is not weakness, but the strongest form of courage. Sadia's story reminds us that the deepest wounds in life are not always caused by strangers, but often by those closest to us. Being falsely accused, rejected, and silenced can break a person's spirit, or it can reveal a strength no one expected. What carried Sadia through shame, exile, and betrayal was not revenge, wealth, or luck. It was her refusal to let lies define her identity, and her courage to choose truth even when it cost her everything. This story teaches us that forgiveness is not forgetting and mercy is not weakness. Sometimes forgiving others is really about freeing ourselves from the weight of pain. Justice does not always arrive loudly or quickly, but when it does, it asks us an important question. What kind of people will we be once the truth is revealed? Will we repeat the cruelty of the past, or will we build something better? Sadia chose meaning over bitterness, dignity over anger, and purpose over comfort. In doing so, she didn't just change her own life, she changed her entire community. Her journey reminds us that no matter how poor, powerless, or voiceless you feel, your choices still matter. Your character still matters. And your story is not over just because someone tried to silence you. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments below. Where are you watching from, and what part of Sadia's journey stayed with you the most? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one.